The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Providence Municipal Court prepared for another day of routine traffic violations and minor disputes. Judge Frank Caprio, beloved by viewers of his television show Caught in Providence, adjusted his black robe and reviewed the day's docket. At 78 years old, he had seen thousands of cases cross his bench, each one teaching him something new about human nature and the complexities of life. The courtroom filled with its usual mix of defendants, lawyers, and curious onlookers. Some came to contest parking tickets, others to explain why they had driven without proper documentation. Judge Caprio treated each person with dignity and respect, understanding that behind every violation was a human story waiting to be heard. As the morning session began, the bailiff called out names from the schedule. Mrs. Rodriguez explained how she had parked illegally while rushing her sick child to the hospital. A college student apologized for driving with an expired registration, explaining how his part-time job barely covered tuition. Judge Caprio listened carefully to each story, his weathered hands folded in front of him, his kind eyes reflecting decades of wisdom gained from serving his community. The courtroom had a warm atmosphere that day, filled with the gentle hum of conversation and the occasional chuckle when Judge Caprio made one of his trademark jokes. His Italian-American heritage showed in his animated gestures and the way he spoke directly to people, making them feel heard and understood rather than judged and condemned. Around mid-morning, something unusual happened. The bailiff announced a name that seemed different from the others on the docket. The courtroom fell quiet as footsteps echoed across the polished floor. Every head turned to watch as a tall figure in an impeccable uniform walked toward the judge's bench. The man wore a pristine red tunic with gold braiding, perfectly pressed black trousers with a red stripe down the side, and polished black boots that reflected the courtroom lights. His bearskin hat was tucked under his left arm, revealing short-cropped hair and a serious expression. The uniform was unmistakable to anyone familiar with British ceremony and tradition. This was a member of the Queen's Guard, one of the elite soldiers responsible for protecting British royal palaces and the royal family. His presence in a Providence courtroom was so unexpected that several people reached for their phones to capture the moment, though they were quickly reminded that recording was not permitted during court proceedings. Judge Caprio looked up from his papers, his eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. In all his years on the bench, he had never seen anything quite like this. The guardsman stood at attention, his posture perfect, his gaze fixed straight ahead. There was something deeply moving about seeing this symbol of British military tradition in an American courtroom, bridging two worlds that rarely intersected. The bailiff read the charge. A simple parking violation that had occurred 3 days earlier near downtown Providence. According to the citation, a vehicle registered to the defendant had been parked in a restricted zone during rush hour. It was the kind of mundane infraction that Judge Caprio handled dozens of times each day. Yet the presence of the guardsman transformed it into something extraordinary. As Judge Caprio prepared to address the defendant, he noticed something in the guardsman's eyes. Despite the formal military bearing and the stoic expression required by his duty, there was a vulnerability there, a human story waiting beneath the ceremonial uniform. The judge had developed an instinct for reading people over the years, and he sensed that this case would be different from anything he had encountered before. The courtroom remained unusually quiet. Even the court reporter seemed to pause, her fingers hovering over the keys as if she too recognized that something significant was about to unfold. The morning light streaming through the tall windows seemed to highlight the contrast between the everyday setting of municipal court and the extraordinary presence of this guardsman who had traveled so far from his usual post. Judge Caprio cleared his throat gently, his voice carrying the warmth that had made him famous beyond the boundaries of Rhode Island. He understood that respect and dignity were universal languages, whether addressing a local resident or someone who served in one of the world's most prestigious military units. The guardsman remained at attention, waiting for permission to speak. His training had taught him discipline and protocol, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The parking ticket that brought him here was simple enough to explain, but the story behind it was something far more complex and deeply personal. Other defendants in the courtroom watched with fascination and curiosity. Some had never seen a Queen's Guard except in photographs or documentaries about British royalty. The pristine uniform and military bearing seemed almost out of place in the casual atmosphere of traffic court. Yet somehow it felt right that this story should unfold in Judge Caprio's courtroom, where human dignity and understanding took precedence over rigid legal procedures. The judge leaned forward slightly, his expression encouraging rather than intimidating. He had built his reputation on giving people a chance to tell their stories, to explain the circumstances that led them to his courtroom. He believed that justice was best served when tempered with compassion and understanding, principles that had guided him throughout his long career on the bench. As the moment stretched on, the guardsman seemed to gather himself, preparing to share something that would touch everyone present. The parking violation was merely the surface of a much deeper story, one that would reveal the human heart beating beneath the ceremonial uniform and remind everyone in the courtroom that even those who serve in the most formal and traditional roles are, at their core, people with hopes, fears, and profound personal experiences that shape their lives. Judge Caprio nodded toward the guardsman, his voice gentle but clear. "Please tell me your name and explain what brought you here today." The formality of the courtroom seemed to soften as he spoke, creating space for a human conversation within the bounds of legal procedure. The guardsman straightened even more, if that was possible, and spoke in a crisp British accent that carried across the quiet courtroom. "Your Honor, I am Guardsman James Morrison, serving with Her Majesty's Coldstream Guards. I am here regarding a parking citation issued 3 days ago." His voice was steady and professional, but there was something underneath it, an emotion carefully controlled but not entirely hidden. Judge Caprio studied the young man's face, noting the precision of his speech and the way he held himself. "Guardsman Morrison, I have to say, in all my years on this bench, you're the first member of the Queen's Guard to appear in my courtroom. What brings you to Providence and how did you end up with a parking ticket?" The guardsman's composure wavered slightly, just for a moment before he regained his military bearing. "Sir, I am here on personal leave. I traveled from London to Providence to visit someone very important to me." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "During my visit, I received the parking citation while attending to urgent family matters." The judge leaned back in his chair, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the guardsman's demeanor. Something in the young man's voice suggested this was not a simple vacation or casual visit. "Family matters can be complicated, son. Would you like to tell me more about what brought you all this way?" For the first time since entering the courtroom, Guardsman Morrison's military composure cracked slightly. His shoulders remained straight, but his voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with formal protocol. "Your Honor, I came to Providence to see my grandmother. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12 years old." The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Even Judge Caprio, who had heard countless personal stories over the years, felt the gravity of the moment. "I'm sorry for your loss, Guardsman Morrison. Tell me about your grandmother." The guardsman's eyes brightened slightly, though his posture remained perfect. "Rose Morrison, Your Honor. She's 93 years old and has been living in Providence for the past 15 years since she moved here to be closer to her sister. She's the reason I enlisted in the Guards. She always told me stories about honor, duty, and service to something greater than yourself." Judge Caprio nodded thoughtfully. "She sounds like a remarkable woman. Is she well?" The question hung in the air for a moment before Guardsman Morrison answered, his voice quieter now. "No, sir. She's in the final stages of cancer. The doctors say she has perhaps weeks, maybe days left." His training kept his voice steady, but the pain was unmistakable. "I used all my accumulated leave and flew here as soon as I received word from her doctors." The judge's expression softened further. "That's a long journey to make, especially on short notice. The parking ticket happened while you were visiting her?" Guardsman Morrison nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I had been at Rhode Island Hospital with her for 3 days straight. On Tuesday morning, she took a turn for the worse. The nurses called me around 6 in the morning, saying I should come immediately if I wanted to say goodbye." His voice remained controlled, but the emotion beneath it was clear to everyone listening. "I drove to the hospital as quickly as I could," he continued. "When I arrived, I parked in what I thought was a visitor space, but I later discovered it was reserved for hospital staff during morning hours. I spent the next 12 hours at her bedside, holding her hand and talking to her about my service, about the places I've been stationed, about how grateful I am for everything she taught me." Judge Caprio listened intently, his hands clasped in front of him. "Was she able to respond to you?" A small smile crossed the guardsman's face, the first break in his formal demeanor since entering the courtroom. She was, Your Honor. Despite the medication and her weakness, she was still sharp as a tack. She told me she was proud of the man I had become, and that seeing me in my uniform one last time was the greatest gift she could have received. The courtroom remained completely silent. Several people in the gallery wiped their eyes, moved by the raw honesty of the guardsman's words. Judge Caprio himself seemed touched by the story unfolding before him. When I finally left the hospital that evening, Guardsman Morrison continued, I found the parking citation on my rental car. Under normal circumstances, I would have simply paid the fine without question. However, my grandmother insisted that I contest it. She said it was important for me to tell the story, to help people understand that sometimes life puts us in situations where we have to choose between following rules and following our hearts. Judge Caprio raised an eyebrow. Your grandmother told you to come to court? The guardsman's smile became more pronounced. She did, Your Honor. She said that in her experience, most people in positions of authority are fair-minded individuals who understand that life is complicated. She specifically mentioned that she had heard wonderful things about the judge who presides over this court, about your reputation for treating people with dignity and understanding their circumstances. The judge chuckled softly. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. How is she doing now? Guardsman Morrison's expression grew serious again. She passed away yesterday morning, Your Honor, peacefully with me holding her hand. Her last words to me were to remember that true service means serving others with compassion and understanding, whether you're wearing a uniform or not. The silence that followed Guardsman Morrison's announcement was profound and heavy. Judge Caprio closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the weight of what he had just heard. When he opened them again, his expression showed the deep compassion that had made him beloved by so many who had appeared in his courtroom over the years. I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Guardsman Morrison, the judge said softly. Your grandmother sounds like she was an extraordinary woman who raised an extraordinary young man. He paused, looking down at the paperwork on his desk, then back up at the guardsman. You could have simply paid this fine and returned to London for her funeral arrangements. Why did you choose to honor her request to appear in court? Guardsman Morrison stood even straighter if that was possible. Your Honor, my grandmother taught me that every action we take is an opportunity to honor those who came before us and to serve those who will come after us. She believed that sharing our stories helps build understanding between people, regardless of their backgrounds or circumstances. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Tell me more about what she meant by that. The guardsman's eyes took on a distant look as if he were seeing his grandmother's face as he spoke. She used to tell me stories about her own childhood during World War II. She was just a young girl living in London during the Blitz. Every night, her family would go down into the underground stations to shelter from the bombing raids. He paused, collecting his thoughts. She said that in those tunnels, crammed together with hundreds of other people, she learned that everyone has a story worth hearing. There was the elderly businessman who shared his sandwich with hungry children, the young mother who sang lullabies to calm other people's babies, the teenage boy who read aloud from books to help pass the long, frightening hours. Judge Caprio listened intently, understanding that this story was building toward something important. Those experiences shaped her view of the world? Absolutely, Your Honor. She said that crisis has a way of stripping away the surface differences between people and revealing their common humanity. A parking ticket might seem trivial compared to wartime bombing, but she believed that every moment when we choose compassion over rigid rule-following is a victory for human understanding. The guardsman's voice grew stronger as he continued. When I was growing up, she would tell me that true leadership, whether in the military or civilian life, means recognizing when rules serve people and when people need to take precedence over rules. She said that the best leaders are those who understand the difference. Judge Caprio smiled slightly. She was teaching you about justice and mercy. Yes, sir. She said that justice without mercy is just punishment, but mercy without justice is just chaos. The goal should be to find the balance that serves both the law and the people the law is meant to protect. Guardsman Morrison's voice carried conviction as he spoke. She believed that your courtroom was a place where that balance was achieved regularly. The judge looked surprised. She knew about my court? Guardsman Morrison nodded. She was a regular viewer of your television show, Your Honor. She said it gave her hope to see someone in authority who took the time to understand people's circumstances before making decisions. She particularly remembered a case where you helped a veteran who was struggling with medical bills, and another where you assisted a single mother who was working 3 jobs to support her children. The courtroom gallery listened with rapt attention as the guardsman continued. She said that watching your show reminded her of something she learned during the war, that small acts of kindness and understanding can have profound impacts on people's lives. A judge who dismisses a parking ticket for someone facing a family crisis might seem like a minor gesture, but to that person, it represents hope that the world still contains compassion. Judge Caprio was clearly moved by these words. Your grandmother was a philosopher as well as a loving caregiver. She was, sir. But more than that, she was a teacher who understood that wisdom is only valuable when it's shared and applied. Guardsman Morrison's voice carried deep respect and love. She insisted that I appear before you not because she wanted the fine dismissed, but because she wanted me to experience firsthand what she had seen on television, a place where justice and compassion work together. The guardsman paused, then continued with obvious emotion in his voice. She said that as a Queen's Guard, I would spend my career protecting tradition and ceremony, which are important values. But she wanted me to also understand that the highest traditions are those that serve human dignity and understanding. Judge Caprio leaned forward. What did she want you to learn from this experience? She wanted me to see that authority exercised with compassion creates respect and trust, while authority exercised without understanding creates fear and resentment. The guardsman's military bearing remained perfect, but his voice carried the warmth of someone sharing a beloved teacher's lessons. She said that whether someone wears a judge's robes or a guardsman's uniform, their true measure is how they treat people who have no power to reward or punish them. The judge nodded slowly. Your grandmother was teaching you about servant leadership. Exactly, Your Honor. She said that the greatest leaders are those who understand that their power exists to serve others, not to elevate themselves. Guardsman Morrison's eyes were bright with unshed tears, though his composure remained intact. She wanted me to witness how you treat people in your courtroom so that I would carry that example with me throughout my military career and beyond. Judge Caprio was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the profound responsibility that had been placed before him. So you're here not just because of a parking ticket, but because a dying woman wanted to give her grandson a final lesson about leadership and compassion. Yes, sir. She said that the stories we choose to tell and the examples we choose to follow shape who we become. The guardsman's voice was steady but filled with emotion. This parking ticket gave her an opportunity to send me to learn from someone she deeply respected and admired. Judge Caprio sat back in his chair, visibly moved by the depth of wisdom that had brought this young guardsman to his courtroom. The weight of the moment was not lost on him. He was being asked to fulfill a dying woman's final wish for her grandson, to witness compassion in action. Guardsman Morrison, the judge began slowly. Your grandmother sounds like she was a remarkable woman who understood something fundamental about human nature and leadership. But I have to ask, what happens now? You've shared her story and her wisdom with this courtroom. How do you plan to honor her memory moving forward? The guardsman's eyes brightened with purpose. Your Honor, my grandmother made me promise to carry her lessons forward in my service. She said that every person I encounter, whether a fellow soldier, a tourist at Buckingham Palace, or someone I meet in civilian life, deserves to be treated with the same dignity and respect I would want for myself or for her. Judge Caprio nodded. That's a beautiful promise to make to someone you loved. But promises can be difficult to keep when faced with the pressures of military life and protocol. She anticipated that concern. Sir? Guardsman Morrison reached into his uniform pocket and carefully withdrew a small worn leather journal. She gave me this during my last visit with her. It belonged to her father, who served in the Royal Navy during World War I. She said he wrote in it every day, recording not just events but lessons learned and opportunities to serve others better. The judge looked at the journal with interest. She wanted you to continue that tradition? Yes, Your Honor. She said that writing down our experiences and the lessons we learn from them helps us remember our commitments when times get difficult. She asked me to record not just my military duties, but every interaction where I have the opportunity to show compassion or understanding to another person. Guardsman Morrison held the journal carefully, as if it contained precious treasures. She said that at the end of each day I should ask myself 3 questions. Did I treat others with dignity today? Did I look for opportunities to help rather than just opportunities to enforce rules? And did I remember that everyone I met has a story worth hearing? The courtroom remained completely silent, everyone present understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. A young man being shaped by the wisdom of a woman who understood that true service extends far beyond following orders or enforcing regulations. Judge Caprio smiled warmly. Those are powerful questions to live by. Your grandmother was preparing you to be a leader who serves with both strength and compassion. She was, sir, and she said that this courtroom appearance would be my first entry in the journal. The guardsman's voice carried deep emotion as he continued. She wanted me to write about what I learned from watching you balance justice and mercy, and how I could apply those lessons in my own service. The judge leaned forward. What do you think you'll write about today's experience? Guardsman Morrison thought for a moment before responding. I'll write about how true authority comes from treating people with respect, rather than demanding it through force. I'll record how you took the time to understand my circumstances, rather than simply processing a violation. And I'll note how your compassion didn't weaken your position as a judge but actually strengthened the respect everyone in this room has for your court. Judge Caprio was clearly touched by these words. Your grandmother raised a thoughtful and observant young man. But tell me, what about the practical aspects of your life moving forward? You have a funeral to arrange, military duties to return to, and a grief process to work through. The guardsman's composure remained steady. My grandmother planned for all of that, Your Honor. She arranged her own funeral services months ago and left detailed instructions for everything. She said she didn't want me to be burdened with difficult decisions while grieving. She wanted me to focus on honoring her memory through my actions rather than being overwhelmed by logistics. She thought of everything, the judge observed with admiration. She did, sir. She even arranged for her pastor to deliver a specific message at her funeral service. Guardsman Morrison's eyes reflected both sadness and pride. She wanted him to tell the congregation that her greatest accomplishment was not the 93 years she lived, but the example she hoped to leave for those who came after her. Judge Caprio shook his head in wonder. What example did she want to leave? That every person has the power to make the world a little better through small acts of kindness and understanding. The guardsman's voice grew stronger as he shared his grandmother's message. She said that we don't need to be judges or soldiers or people in positions of obvious authority to make a difference. We just need to choose compassion over indifference, understanding over judgment, and service over selfishness. The judge was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the profound wisdom being shared in his courtroom. Guardsman Morrison, your grandmother's influence on you is obvious and admirable, but I'm curious about something. You mentioned that she watched my television show regularly. Did she have any specific thoughts about what she saw? The guardsman smiled, the first truly relaxed expression he had shown since entering the courtroom. She had many thoughts, Your Honor. She said that watching your show gave her faith that there are still people in positions of authority who remember that their power exists to serve justice, not just to enforce rules. She said that. Judge Caprio seemed surprised by the specific nature of the comment. She did, sir. She particularly mentioned a case where you helped a veteran who couldn't afford to pay a fine because his disability benefits had been delayed. She said that your decision to dismiss the charge and arrange for assistance with his situation showed her what leadership should look like. Guardsman Morrison's voice carried deep respect as he continued. She said that true leaders don't just apply rules. They understand the human circumstances behind those rules. Judge Caprio remembered that case well. I recall that situation. The veteran had served multiple tours overseas and was struggling with both physical and emotional challenges from his service. Yes, sir. My grandmother said that watching you take the time to understand his circumstances and then take action to help him reminded her why she had raised me to believe in service to others. The guardsman paused. She said it gave her confidence that the values she had tried to instill in me were still relevant in today's world. Judge Caprio stood up from his bench, something he rarely did during court proceedings. The gesture was not lost on anyone in the courtroom. This was clearly a moment that transcended normal legal protocol. He walked around to the front of his desk, positioning himself closer to the guardsman. Guardsman Morrison, I need you to understand something, the judge began, his voice carrying the weight of his years of experience and wisdom. In all my decades on this bench, I have never encountered a case that moved me quite like this one. Your grandmother's final gift to you, and to this courtroom, is a reminder of why we serve in the first place. The guardsman remained at attention, but his eyes showed deep appreciation for the judge's words. Sir, she would be honored to know that her story touched you. Judge Caprio shook his head slowly. No, son. She would be proud to know that her grandson understood her lessons well enough to share them with integrity and honor. The way you've conducted yourself today tells me everything I need to know about the woman who raised you. The judge paused, looking around the courtroom at the faces of everyone present, court staff, other defendants, observers who had come expecting routine traffic violations, but instead witnessed something profound. Your grandmother sent you, here to learn about compassion and justice, but I think she also wanted you to teach the rest of us something important. Guardsman Morrison looked puzzled. What could I possibly teach you, Your Honor? You've reminded us that service is not about the uniform we wear or the position we hold, Judge Caprio explained. It's about how we treat the people we encounter every single day. Your grandmother understood that whether someone is a Queen's Guard, a judge, a teacher, or a store clerk, they have the same opportunity to make someone's day a little better or a little worse. The judge returned to his bench, but remained standing. Your grandmother also understood something that many people forget, that the most important lessons in life often come wrapped in unexpected packages. A parking ticket became a classroom. A court appearance became a celebration of a life well lived. Guardsman Morrison nodded. She always said that God has a sense of humor about how he arranges learning opportunities. Judge Caprio chuckled. She sounds like she was right about that. Now, regarding this parking violation, I'm going to dismiss all charges. But I want to be clear about why. He looked directly at the guardsman. I'm not dismissing it because your story moved me, though it certainly did. I'm dismissing it because the circumstances clearly warrant it. You were attending to a family emergency at a hospital. You made an honest mistake about parking regulations, and you've conducted yourself with honor throughout this process. The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause, something that rarely happened in municipal court. Judge Caprio allowed it to continue for a moment before raising his hand for silence. But more importantly, the judge continued, I want you to know that your grandmother's faith in the power of compassionate authority was not misplaced. She sent you here believing that you would witness justice tempered with mercy, and I hope that's exactly what you've seen today. Guardsman Morrison's military composure finally cracked slightly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Your Honor, she would be so grateful to know that her final lesson was delivered exactly as she hoped it would be. Judge Caprio smiled warmly. I have a feeling she knew exactly how this would unfold. Wise women like your grandmother usually do. He paused thoughtfully. Before you return to your duties in London, I want to ask you something. Your grandmother clearly believed that sharing stories helps build understanding between people. Would you be willing to share her story more widely? The guardsman looked curious. What do you mean, sir? Your appearance here today will be broadcast on television, just like all our court proceedings. Thousands of people will hear your grandmother's story and her lessons about compassion and service. Are you comfortable with that level of visibility? Guardsman Morrison straightened even more. Your Honor, my grandmother would be thrilled to know that her story might inspire others to treat each other with more kindness and understanding. She believed that wisdom should be shared, not hoarded. Judge Caprio nodded approvingly. I thought you might say that. Your grandmother raised a man who understands that true service means being willing to be vulnerable in order to help others. The judge looked around the courtroom once more. Ladies and gentlemen, we've all been privileged to witness something special today. We've seen how the love of a grandmother can shape a young man's character, how wisdom can be passed down through generations, and how unexpected circumstances can become opportunities for grace and understanding. He turned back to Guardsman Morrison. Your grandmother's journal that you mentioned, I hope you'll write about more than just what you observed today. I hope you'll also record what you gave to this courtroom and everyone who heard your story. The guardsman looked puzzled again. What did I give, Your Honor? You gave us a reminder of why we chose our paths of service in the first place, Judge Caprio explained. You showed us that honor and duty can coexist with compassion and flexibility. You demonstrated that strength and vulnerability are not opposites but partners in authentic leadership. The judge's voice grew more emotional as he continued. Your grandmother sent you here to learn, but she also sent you to teach. And you've taught us that the most powerful way to honor those who shaped us is to carry their values forward in our daily actions. Guardsman Morrison stood silent for a moment, clearly processing the weight of what the judge had said. Your Honor, I promise you that I will carry both her lessons and this experience with me for the rest of my life. Every time I put on this uniform, I'll remember that it represents not just military tradition but a commitment to serve others with dignity and compassion. Judge Caprio smiled broadly. That's exactly what your grandmother hoped you would say. And I have no doubt that wherever she is now, she's very proud of the man she helped create. As the court session concluded, something extraordinary happened that no one present would ever forget. Guardsman Morrison, still maintaining his perfect military posture, did something that caught everyone by surprise. He reached into his uniform pocket once more and withdrew a small envelope, sealed with old-fashioned wax. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, my grandmother asked me to give this to you after our court appearance. She wrote it several weeks ago, before she became too weak to hold a pen properly. Judge Caprio looked at the envelope with wonder and curiosity. She wrote me a letter? Yes, sir. She said she wanted to thank you personally for the example you've set through your television show and your service to the community. She also said she had something important to share with you. Guardsman Morrison extended the envelope toward the judge. She made me promise to deliver it only after you had heard our story. Judge Caprio accepted the letter with reverence, understanding that he was holding something precious, the final words of a remarkable woman who had touched his life without ever meeting him. May I read it aloud, or did she intend it to be private? The guardsman smiled. She specifically asked me to request that you read it to everyone present. She said that her words were meant not just for you, but for anyone who might benefit from hearing them. The judge carefully opened the envelope, revealing handwriting that was shaky but still legible, the script of an elderly woman determined to share one final message. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. Dear Judge Caprio, my name is Rose Morrison, and I am the grandmother of the young guardsman who appeared before you today. By the time you read this letter, I will have passed on to whatever comes next, but I wanted to ensure that my gratitude and my final thoughts reached you. The judge's voice grew softer as he continued reading. I have watched your television show for many years, and each episode has reminded me of something important about human nature. You have shown thousands of viewers that authority can be exercised with compassion, that justice can be tempered with mercy, and that taking time to understand someone's story is never time wasted. Judge Caprio paused, clearly moved by the woman's words. During my 93 years on this earth, I have learned that the measure of a person's life is not found in their accomplishments or their failures, but in how they treat others when no one is watching, and when there is no reward for kindness other than the satisfaction of having done what is right. The courtroom remained completely silent as the judge continued. I have watched you demonstrate this principle repeatedly in your courtroom. I have seen you dismiss charges for people facing genuine hardship, arrange assistance for those in need, and treat every person who appears before you with dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances or background. Judge Caprio's voice carried deep emotion as he read on. You have shown my grandson and everyone who watches your show that true leadership means serving others, rather than being served by them. You have demonstrated that wisdom lies not in rigid rule application, but in understanding when compassion serves justice better than punishment. The judge looked up at Guardsman Morrison, who stood listening with obvious pride and love for his grandmother's words. Then he continued reading. I am sending my grandson to your courtroom not because I want special treatment for a parking violation, but because I want him to witness firsthand what I have seen on television. A man who understands that his position exists to help others, not to elevate himself. Judge Caprio, the letter continued, I want you to know that your example has influenced how I raised my grandson. When he was struggling with the decision to join the military, I told him about watching you balance strength with kindness in your courtroom. I explained that true service means protecting others while never forgetting their humanity. The judge's voice grew quieter as he read the most personal part of the letter. My grandson has faced many challenges in his young life. Losing his parents at 12 years old could have filled him with anger or bitterness. Instead, I tried to show him that tragedy can either harden our hearts or open them wider to the suffering of others. Watching your show together became one of our ways of discussing what it means to choose compassion over cynicism. Judge Caprio paused, looking around the courtroom at the faces of everyone present. Court staff members wiping their eyes, defendants who had forgotten their own legal troubles, observers who had stumbled upon something far more meaningful than they had expected. You may wonder why an elderly woman would spend her final weeks arranging for her grandson to appear in your courtroom over a simple parking ticket. The letter continued. The answer is that I wanted him to experience something that television cannot fully capture: the presence of someone who genuinely cares about the people they serve. I wanted him to see that leadership is not about the power to punish, but about the wisdom to understand. The judge's hands were slightly shaky as he continued reading. James will return to London soon to resume his duties as a Queen's Guard. He will stand watch over palaces and protect members of the royal family. But more importantly, he will carry with him the example you have set of what it means to serve with both strength and compassion. I have one final request, the letter went on. Please know that your kindness to strangers has rippled far beyond your courtroom in Providence. A lonely grandmother in a hospital bed found comfort in watching you treat people with dignity. A young soldier learned about leadership by seeing you balance justice with mercy, and countless others have been inspired to treat their neighbors with more patience and understanding because of your example. Judge Caprio looked up at Guardsman Morrison, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman. The guardsman nodded. She was, Your Honor, but she would say that you helped shape her grandson's understanding of what service should look like. The judge returned to the letter for its conclusion. Judge Caprio, I hope that when you meet people like my grandson in your courtroom, you will remember that behind every case is a human story worth hearing. I hope you will continue to show the world that authority exercised with compassion creates respect rather than fear, understanding rather than resentment. Thank you for the example you have set, not just for my grandson, but for everyone who has had the privilege of witnessing your work. Thank you for proving that there are still people in positions of power who remember that their greatest responsibility is to serve others with dignity and grace. The judge's voice was barely above a whisper as he read the final lines. With deep gratitude and respect, Rose Morrison. Postscript. Please tell James that his parents would be proud of the man he has become, and that I will be watching over him always. The silence that followed was profound and sacred. Judge Caprio carefully folded the letter and looked at Guardsman Morrison, who was struggling to maintain his military composure while processing his grandmother's final gift to him. Guardsman Morrison, the judge said softly, your grandmother's letter is one of the most beautiful things I have ever received. She understood something that many people never learn, that the influence we have on others extends far beyond what we can see or measure. The guardsman's voice was thick with emotion as he responded, Your Honor, she spent her final weeks making sure that the people who had influenced her life knew how much their examples meant to her. She wrote similar letters to her pastor, her doctor, and several neighbors who had shown her kindness over the years. Judge Caprio shook his head in amazement. She was teaching us all one final lesson, that expressing gratitude and acknowledging the good in others is a gift we can give, that costs nothing but means everything. The judge stood once more and walked around his bench to stand directly in front of the guardsman. James, may I call you James? Of course, Your Honor. James, your grandmother asked me to tell you that your parents would be proud of the man you've become. I want you to know that after spending this time with you today, I completely agree with her assessment. She raised a man of character, integrity, and compassion. Judge Caprio extended his hand to the guardsman, who shook it firmly. When you return to London and resume your duties, I want you to remember that you are not just protecting buildings and people. You are representing the values that your grandmother instilled in you: service, dignity, and compassion. The courtroom erupted in sustained applause as the two men shook hands. When the applause finally died down, Judge Caprio had one final thing to say. Ladies and gentlemen, we have all been privileged to witness something extraordinary today. We have seen how love transcends death, how wisdom passes from one generation to the next, and how unexpected moments can become profound teachers. Guardsman Morrison's grandmother may have passed away, but her influence lives on in her grandson and in everyone who heard her story today. As Guardsman Morrison prepared to leave the courtroom, Judge Caprio called out one last time. "James, when you write in your grandmother's journal tonight, please include a message from all of us here in Providence. Tell her that her final lesson was received, understood, and will be carried forward by everyone who was here today." The guardsman turned back, stood at attention one final time.